2, nutrition and the digestive system. So again, this unit's going to be broken up into 2 videos. Video number 1 will be on nutrition, what we eat, why we eat, what happens if we stop eating. And then video 2 will be on the digestive system itself, the organs that are involved in breaking down our food, what happens after our food is broken down, and the methods we use to break those foods down. So to begin, first question is, why do we eat food? Obviously, we need to eat food to survive, but what does that really mean? What do we do with the food that we eat? We eat food, we break it down into its smallest little parts. So all the food we eat comes in the form of proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. And we'll talk more about those in a minute, but we break them down into their tiny little parts. And then we use those tiny little parts that we absorb into our body for everything. So when we break it down, we get a lot of energy right here. And that's energy to do all of our cell processes. So you're walking, running, eating, blinking, breathing, cell replication, all of that, all of the energy required to do all of those processes comes from breaking down the food that we eat. When you grow, obviously, you have more cells in your body now than you did when you were a baby because your cells divide and that allows you to grow. But making new cells means those cells need substance. So they need proteins, they need lipids, they need sugar, they need all the building blocks of those cells. And we get those building blocks from our food. If you get a cut, so at this point we're all pretty much done growing, but we still need to repair our bodies. So if you get a cut, if you break a bone, if you pull a muscle, your body's pretty good at repairing itself. But again, we get those little building blocks needed for repair from the food that we eat. So we can summarize all of this in the process of building new molecules. So when we talk about molecules, we're mostly talking about proteins. Our hair, our skin, our nails, our muscles, our bones, all of these things are made up of proteins. And in order to build those proteins, like we talked about last week in class, we need those little amino acids that we get from our food. All the cells that reproduce have a cell membrane around them made up of lipids, and we get those lipids to make those cell membranes from our food. All of those cells are filled with DNA, and we get the DNA inside those cells from our food. So really we need to eat in order to build new molecules and get energy. So what happens if we stop eating? Here's a little video. There's probably an ad at the beginning, but it's going to tell us what happens when we stop eating food. Hold tight for this.
I've lost 13 pounds so far, and I'm only on week 5.
Right.
I've been doing...
Okay.
Food is a favorite pastime for many, which is convenient because we need it to live. But what would happen to you and your body if you were to completely stop eating food right now? In the first 6 hours, all is fairly normal. Your body begins to break down glycogen, which stores energy in your body, into glucose, which your cells use as fuel. Around 25% of energy generated this way is used for your brain alone, while the rest goes to muscle tissue and red blood cells. But after about 6 hours, this method of energy production halts as the glycogen stores deplete, which can lead to the notorious hangry or hungry and angry feeling that many of us know too well. At this point, your body enters a state called ketosis as it begins to fast or starve. Because there's very little glucose in your blood, your body must begin to break down fat for energy. This fat is in turn broken down into fatty acids. However, your brain can't use long-chain fatty acids, which is a problem. Because there's no more glucose and the fats are too large to cross the blood-brain barrier, your brain changes modes and begins to use ketone bodies for energy, which are short-chain derivatives of fatty acids. This works for the time being, but ultimately only 75% of the brain's energy requirements can come from ketones. It still needs glucose, which means your cognitive functioning becomes impaired. Now, it's important to mention that you don't have to be starving to be in ketosis. Many people enter this phase if they're on a low-carb diet, or professional athletes who use all their carbs for an extended period of time, like marathon runners, will be in this state as well. However, beyond 72 hours, not only will your mood and energy suffer, but your brain will start to break down your body's own protein. The proteins release amino acids which can be converted into glucose, which is great news for your brain, but bad news for your body. Basically, your body is cannibalizing itself by destroying your muscle mass. In women, undernutrition often shuts down the menstrual cycle as the body tries to reduce energy expenditure. Bone density diminishes, and both men and women may experience loss of libido. Within a few weeks, the body's immune system will be so weakened without any vitamins or minerals that many will die from disease. Otherwise, it will continue to use up all energy sources until there is no glucose, fat, tissue, or muscle mass left. One of the more common causes of death is cardiac arrhythmia or heart attack due to the tissue degradation in the heart, diaphragm, and body. This is fairly common in those suffering from anorexia. Of course, the body experiences severe organ failure all around. Starvation can lead to death in as short as 3 weeks or up to 70 days, as documented during the Irish hunger strikes in 1981, though the duration of survival is greatly influenced by how hydrated you are and the amount of fat reserves your body has, which in some ways is incredible that the body can sustain for so long with no food. And yet, approximately 795 million people around the world have to deal with this reality. The good news is that the 7 richest countries have pledged to lift 500 million people out of hunger and malnutrition by 2030, but we need to hold them accountable. We're working with an organization called Global Citizen to do just that, and here's a really easy way that you can help out too. By sharing this video and then heading to the Global Citizen website form here, you'll be adding your voice to an important educational movement towards ending hunger worldwide.
All right. So, as you can see, it is important for us to eat. If we stop eating, our body finds a way to get energy elsewhere, but it requires essentially cannibalizing itself, eating itself from the inside out in order to get that energy, which eventually will lead to death. So let's start with talking about nutrition. Nutrition is just the study of food, what we eat, and how it affects our body. When we talk about nutrients that we need, water is very important. We'll talk about water in the next slide. The macromolecules that I've mentioned earlier, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids are the 4 macromolecules. Macromolecule is just a very large molecule in our body. Also in the food that we eat, the macromolecules are the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. And then in smaller amounts, we need vitamins and minerals. Still super important for our health, but we just don't need the quantity that we need of the other macromolecules. So water, let's talk about water first. In a grown adult, the body is about 60% water. So the brain, the muscles, the blood, even some of the bones are all made up of water. And this is the digestive system. So we'll start by talking about how water helps convert food to energy. So when we break down our food, we need water in order to take those molecules apart and absorb that food into our body, those nutrients. We need that water for energy. We need water to regulate body temperature. So it prevents us from getting too hot or too cold with changes in the temperature outside. Water in our blood helps carry nutrients and oxygen to all of our cells. And as you can see, it makes up most of our body here. So lots of uses for water. It's very important. We could talk about water forever. We won't, but just know that it's really important for survival. We're going to focus on the 4 macromolecules. Carbohydrates are like your bread, your pasta, your grains, but also sugary food like sugar and sodas or candy or baked goods contain a lot of carbohydrates. Lipids, again, can be good or bad for you. Healthy lipids are the fats. So healthy lipids are nuts, oils like olive oil or sunflower oil, fish oil, avocados. And then the unhealthy lipids are more like fried food, trans fats, the fatty part of meats, things that you think are not very healthy for you. Proteins are mostly your meats, like the meaty part of the meat. Eggs, fruits and vegetables have a lot of protein in them. And then nucleic acids, we don't really think about nucleic acids when we think about food. But if you think about it, pretty much all the food you eat at one point was alive, whether it was a plant or an animal. And all living things contain DNA. So when we eat these foods, we're able to break that DNA down into its building blocks and then use those nucleotides to copy our own DNA and replicate DNA within our cells. So let's start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the major source of energy in our body. There are 3 forms that we eat. There are simple sugars. So those are the unhealthy sugars. Those are like sugar in drinks, like sodas and juice, or sugar that you add to cakes, cupcakes, candy. Those are your simple sugars, not very healthy. And then complex carbohydrates are good for you. Those are like your potatoes, sweet potatoes, pastas, whole grain bread, which we then break down into simple sugar for energy, but the process is healthier for us. And then there's cellulose, which is fiber, which is funny because we actually can't break down fiber. When we eat fiber, our body doesn't have the enzymes in it to digest the fiber. Cows, on the other hand, do. So if you think about humans, if we were to eat grass all day long, every day, we would not be big. We would be skinny, malnourished. We wouldn't be able to survive on just grass all day. But if you look at a cow who eats grass all day, they're huge. And that's because cows actually have enzymes in their stomach that break down that cellulose into sugar. So when they eat grass, they're essentially eating carbohydrates and sugar. It's like if we were to eat a big spaghetti dinner. So while we can't digest cellulose, it does still help with our digestive system. So it's good to take in fiber. When we break down carbohydrates, we break them down into their simple sugars, their fibers, and their starch. Travels through our digestive system, gets converted into glucose, and then into something called glycogen. And then that glycogen can either fuel the brain, fuel our other muscles, or get stored in our liver so that we can break it down later when we need a source of energy. Again, good carbs and bad carbs. The complex carbs are good. The simple carbs are bad. The complex carbs are high in fiber and nutrients. They help you feel full. They stimulate your metabolism, meaning they speed up your metabolism, help you digest food better. The simple carbs, like the sugars, the cupcakes, the candy, the sugary cereals, soda, refined bread like white bread, they're the bad carbs. They're low in fiber, low in nutrients. They're empty calories. They don't make you feel full, but you store that energy in fat. They make you feel tired. They raise your blood sugar levels. They increase triglycerides, which is what makes you store fat. So many carbs are really good for you. Some carbs are bad. What happens to the excess carbs in our bodies? So if we eat carbohydrates for energy, but we don't use all the energy stored in those carbohydrates, what happens to them? We actually end up storing the excess carbohydrates as fat in our body, which is good if you're a bear who's hibernating for the winter and you're going to need that fat storage throughout the winter because you're not eating food. But we eat food throughout the winter. So it's not great to overindulge in carbohydrates and store the remaining as fat because we don't need that energy storage like hibernating animals do. But we do need fats. Fats are good for us in moderation. All of our cells have these cell membranes around them that are made up of lipids. So we need to eat fat in order to maintain cell membranes. Hormones in your body often are made up of fats, and long-term energy storage is in the form of fat. So it is important to have some of that long-term energy storage. We just don't need excess amounts of it. There are 2 types of fats. There's saturated fats and there's unsaturated fats. Unsaturated fats are good for us. Those are like your oils, your avocados, your fish, nuts. And because they're unsaturated, they have this little bend in the molecule, and that prevents them from packing too closely together, which can cause high cholesterol and heart problems. And these saturated fats, because they're long, straight chains, they tend to pack really closely together, and they cause heart disease and can cause heart attacks, high cholesterol levels. They're not good for you. Those are like butter, the fatty part of meat, potato chips, things that you think of as less healthy. So, love it. We should eat unsaturated, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats like oils, avocado, fish, nuts. We should limit our cheese, our butter, the fat on meats. And you really don't need the fat in cakes and candies and chips and all those artificial trans fats, hydrogenated oils that you see on food labels. You want to cut those out. Those increase heart disease. They